now. Perfect. Isabella Descende is a Latina poet and educator whose work has been published in Narrative, Leveler, Small Orange, the Ekphrastic Review, and many other journals. Her chapbook, Through the New Body, was selected as the winner of the 2019 Poetry Society of America's 30 and Under Chapbook Fellowship and was published in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. She was also selected as a finalist for the 2019 Frontier Digital Poetry Chapbook, the June Jordan Fellowship, Narrative Magazine's Annual Poetry Prize, and Palette's Spotlight Award. She holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University in New York City, where she currently resides. I met Bella in a 2-day class that Gregory Orr taught in December of 2019. I was blown away by the poem she shared with the group, so I was thrilled when I read that her chapbook won one of the coveted PSA awards. You will see why she won tonight. Please help me welcome Isabella Descende.
Am I off mute? I hope so. Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh gosh. Okay. Jennifer, thank you so much for that introduction. You're so sweet. I have to start with so many thank yous. First to Hudson Valley Writers Center for hosting the event. To Jennifer for scouting us and tracking us on our socials. You're so sweet to invite me, and I really am so grateful. And I'm so grateful to everyone that's here tonight for your attention and your time. Thank you so much for being here, and for your donations if you did that. Thank you for your generosity. And to my fellow readers, thank you for sharing this reading tonight. It is so cool to do this from everywhere. So thank you. So much gratitude. And yeah, I'm so excited. So, and I have to thank, oh my goodness, how could I forget, the Poetry Society of America for publishing my chapbook Through the New Body, for getting this book into the world of like the peak of quarantine. I don't know how they did it, but thank you so much. And also big thanks to Evie Shockley, who selected my chapbook and saw something in the work that was worthy. So thank you. So before we start, I just want to just introduce the chapbook really quickly at the risk of explaining myself away. So Through the New Body is an exploration of the body or the self through a couple different lenses. So one of those lenses is an exploration of the self as a woman. So what does it mean to have desire and be an object of desire? Another lens is looking at the body through my cultural identity. As someone with a Cuban mom, how do I write towards that? How do I get closer to that connection? And then also as a survivor of assault. And I say that now because I think sometimes when we read or listen to poems about trauma, there's this weird thing where we talk around the topic. And I remember at the beginning of my healing journey, looking for poems and that expressed what I was going through, and I couldn't find them. So I say that just in case anyone has that experience. This is sort of, it maybe could be triggering, but I also kind of change which poems I'm going to read as I go. So I may not read any of those poems, but just in case, I wanted to share that with you all and make that known. So I'm going to stop talking now and read, which I'm sure you'll all be grateful for. So thank you again. And here we go. So this first poem is called Casa De Santos. Once, while disemboweling the chicken, readying it for my lover's dinner, I remembered my abuela slashing the rooster's throat. I was 4, held the wet blade in my hand, and cried. For days, the carcass hung like a cross over the red front door until it shriveled and stunk, turned gray as dried petals. Abuela said, "Don't cry." She said, "Be fearless and God-fearing as any white man," but I was already like guajiros carving the air with bright machetes. At home, in school, In America, I learned I too could lash a living thing until it fractured like a heart. The blades in our palms, small, slick wounds. In Florida, hydrangeas bloomed despite the heat while I became a woman. How could I admit that under the weight of a fist, I felt shattered, free? Like the Lord, men were kind until they weren't, proving wombs are mouths that always speak. Of course, we carry their darkness inside us like a mantra. I'm no different from my captor, my hand deep inside the animal, my lover asking when he'll be fed. The trick I learned was to be beautiful or merciless as my country, but I couldn't decide which was worse. Now, as I tie and bind the bird, cut the neck, its wings, the bones, all I want is more of this. To feel a throat closing and know I wasn't alone. I mean, no, it wasn't my own. The guavas tremble in man-like skins. Yes, I was a girl, wanting. This poem is for Sheila Abdus Salam, and it's called America's First Female Muslim Judge Found Floating in a River. Her body was discovered near the neighborhood that I lived in at the time that I went to Columbia, and I used to walk down to that river often, so this poem is for her. In April, we will find her body. It is March. New York is gray, in between seasons, like a heart undecided between new love and loss. No one knows why we will have found her here, the dark truth of her body rising up from underwater. Last night, while I was walking down Broadway, some man across the street called me a nappy-haired spick. Near the river, cherry blossoms ripen pink as wounds against the sky. I can't believe what we do to each other. Snow turns to fog, turns to dust over the branches. In 10, 50, 200 years, who will believe us when we say the earth was a hopeless chant? Any man was our captor. If I'm alive, then I'm ashamed of my mouth, silent as a thief. The man on my street corner who begs for change, whom I choose not to see. No one's life is the problem. The problem is a poet can't always lay down in words a feeling they know they'll never forget. When they say I shouldn't feel powerless, I agree, but many times I've stood at the lip of this river and wanted to crawl in. The M60 rolling past me, kicking up muck. Maybe the problem with the living isn't their sorrow, it's that they're still capable of violence. The feeling I can't forget is similar to flowers falling quiet as knives on the spring punch street when they pull out my body by the hair and she lives. This one is a true story. After the bar. After the bar, I took the 1 train and met a boy who told me he wanted to take me home and lick my pussy. He said I wouldn't have to do anything except lie there, lost, unfelt as new, blear snow. I still remember writing this. Lilies charred in summer heat while I searched for an opposite to punishment, and light like April slipped through me, violent as cloudburst burning through fog. But even if I close the blinds, it's there. Even if I tell that boy or that bullet of sun they cannot enter, there's no mercy. One will rest its head against me, ask, don't you want to be alive? Okay. Should know the order. Shame on me. Okay. Elegy for the saxophonist. Turn off that Coltrane crooning from your iPhone and sleep. Weepy and unhurried, eighth notes swarm through us, slung drunk as transfused blood moving through marrow, the way a spirit moves through the new body in which it must reside. Warm-blooded boy, you were only warm for so long. Like a graffitied wall in Brooklyn, you were feral, death-stained, beautiful in your vanishing. I hate that when I first heard you play, your music took me in the way the swan god took the girl. Handsome and lonely, you dazzled like a god. When you stepped on stage, the way a ghost steps back into its body, trying to kiss its lover one last time, I thought of all the nights I'd been backlit by a memory that wouldn't fade away. Oh, my saxophonist, even if you hadn't come to me then, I would have come for you still, loyal as an angel sent to bring back the dead. Once, a surgeon in Antarctica removed his own appendix, and I envied him. I don't trust the blood inside me. With my hands that close to my heart, I don't know if I'd survive. Come, I tell it, bow down. Help me unfold you, undress myself now. Unlace, unkeep, uncut. And I just have a couple more. This poem is called Eve, and it's from the perspective of the Eve that you're probably thinking about. Eve. Men insist I shouldn't use my body to conquer them when men have been using me to look at loneliness less directly. I solve their endless wars. I'm a rack to hang headless hats. Is it lunacy or resilience when something breaks, but we keep on building through it? If there's a science to men, then I know science is a burden just like the body. Like the body, becoming sacred is an act of love or self-deceit. Just look at Adam wrenching out his rib for me. Things haven't changed. Lonely people are still desperate and busy being loud about it. I would know. I'm shapeless as a fledgling, having surrendered all my bones. Look, all I wanted to know was that deeper than my knowing, there was someone I could show my wretchedness to, someone who would be there loving. Or else, I wanted to feel winter coming and not feel like an animal who'd forgotten to wake up. Do I really have to say it? Even leaves redden to ash in the dark, weightless air, proving nature and God are good at showing us all the ways we're wrong. Besides, what woman hasn't been tempted, porous, only wanting what she wanted? Do you blame me, Lord? I'm only doing what you've done, made a man suffer, then surrender before I let him love me. If I was wrong to die for pleasure, so be it. If I was wrong to make my man aware of his body the way wind is aware of its shapelessness only after a locomotive rushes through a tunnel and splits it in half, then I accept what damage, brightness I've caused. I know I've said this already, but I mean it. Once I was good. Now, standing by the pier, the sky opens up in late night light like a scab unwilling to close, and I admit, part of me is still like you, Lord. Some days I'm tired. Some days all I want is to eradicate the earth. Too bad a man I love enters me, slow as light stabbing its way through to morning. God, if you're there, is that beauty or pain? Don't tell me there isn't a difference. Okay. I'm just gonna read, I think I have time, 2 more and then a newer poem, and then I'll wrap up. Okay. This is a sonnet and it's called Instructions for Skinning Deer. Do what men have taught you. Stun me blind. Drag me hog-tied under a fog-washed sky until I hear only the river sloshing with rain. Though it pulsed like an old scab, you were tender with my heart. Shouldn't have felt pity, but I did. See how it aches like a newborn, raw with life? First fur, then blood pooled around us like jasmine mid-bloom. The smell of my death igniting the air. Now there are pieces of me everywhere, clumped and scattering like beetles in the gutter. Touch me. You love me flayed, hung flat as a rug, kicked clean. Go on then, do it. What's stopping you? Your blade already this close. Okay, and then I will read one more. Hippocampus. And this is for Christine Blasey Ford. I just love the way in her testimony she was able to create these like gorgeous metaphors explaining to people how trauma actually lives in the body and the mind. And so that's sort of what influenced this opening. Hippocampus. In the hippocampus, she says, they bounce around like swallows dodging heavy blots of rain. Like ivy, beauty makes her weapon by making her like beauty, what men can never hold. For the rest of her life, every neural path is a coffin of thought. When she sleeps, there beats like laughter drill deep into her brain. I remember the year after the first year, after numbness, when I would walk out to the edge of a road flat as a river and whisper madly to the stars. The well of my mind darkening, the highway's thick spine heavy as water against my back. Oh God, if what divides destroys, then I understand the mind, why it must live separately from the heart. Now, when I walk along the ocean, only the brutality of the tide, the moon doomed in splendor, summoning the water to rise and spin. Like that, we try to obey and love the gentle crushing. Like that, we fall and fall. How will we learn to hold a face again when even orchids look like lips bruised and sewn together? Yes, I tried to love again, but when my man undressed me, I felt the hands of every man, then felt I couldn't breathe. No one was to blame. It was spring. Buds were busy mocking me, proving we could live through many deaths. How dare I thought. But here's what no one told us. Every gentle thing will lose its body. That's the problem with surviving again and again, as we have. Poppies will yawn themselves awake, their blood-stained mouths. One day, you'll have to live. And I will finish with this poem. This is pretty reckless of me. This is a brand new poem. Just took out a workshop. But I just wanted to say it's because it's been on my heart, on my mind. All the protests in Cuba, it's so painful to watch from over here because there's nothing any of us can really do, unfortunately. So what I can do is share a poem with you, and this is that. It's called Self-Portrait at 28, or Milagros. Alone in my studio apartment in New York, I dance to Afro beats and dance hall and post a video of myself online. My mother calls to ask if I'm on drugs because it's difficult for anyone to believe a woman who lives alone might just be happy shimmying in her skin the way the stars shake and ricochet just before they burst into the beautiful catastrophe of nothingness. In true poet's fashion, I have to say, I don't care what they think. I have to build this analogy for you to believe I'm like the stars. I know my ancestors would have danced if they were trapped with me in quarantine because Cuba is an island where everyone is alone and everyone is grateful for their little bit of nothing, and joy is not earned, but made. How else would we have bachata if it weren't for the sorrow of distanced lovers finding each other's bodies under the gold haze of a rum-shocked drink which they sipped and spilled wherever they turned? However they danced, whenever they kissed. when the congas, like familiar heartbeats, thumped like thunder, thumped as if to say, step here, breathe, hold one another. So they did. Haven't I been there? Been so hungry, I was reckless, felt so abandoned in my body that I let any man hold me while we danced, just so I could pretend his hands were the hands of my first love, sliding down my hips. Listen, all I'm trying to say is that the world feels like an incomplete phase of the moon minus beauty. All I'm trying to say is what the people of poor islands already know to be true. That a slick melody strummed against a summered sky rhythming is the key to setting you free. Of course, when Burna Boy blares, I'm a hurricane spiraling. Of course, tocar means to make music and to touch. When I strum the impossible instrument of my skin, I'm a cello humming light, doing what I must to shake the night sky from my bones. I know they say it takes years to release trauma from the body, but here's what suffering, the stars have often taught me. Burning is the only way some of us can get clean. Quemar es la única forma. The problem is, sometimes I forget this. And when I start to feel this way, when I begin to acknowledge the hard truth that I might not ever be deeply loved by anyone else ever again, that it might just be me and this body forever in this home, well, I turn on my music and let the bass snake up my leg because I still love the ruckus it causes inside me. The dirty chaos of my hips, like prayer releasing something, like prayer revealing my sloppy, ineffable heart to the gods. Oh, reader, how else can I admit what I can't cover up in fancy artifice now? All I want is to be held. All I want is for you to come closer and dance with me. Dance with me in this shitty kitchen light and see if you don't feel free once reminded that our fabulous infinitesimal lives, flickering, 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 are just like the stars. Bright, musical miracles that make it okay to say we are.
Thank you so much, Bella. That was really wonderful. It was so great to hear these poems that that I have read online. I shared one of them in the chat if you want to follow along and read that one. And now we are in for a treat. We have Emily Lee Luan. Emily Lee Luan is a Taiwanese American poet and essayist. She is the author of I Watch the Boughs, selected by Gabrielle Calvocoressi for a Poetry of Society of America's Chapbook Fellowship, a 2020 Margins Fellow at the Asian American Writers Workshop. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Best American Poetry 2021, Best New Poets 2019, The Offing, the Adroit Journal, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA in poetry from Rutgers University, Newark. In her poem, In the Morning, I Wake Up Feeling Unmoved, she writes, "It makes so much sense that someone would love me until it doesn't. Please help me welcome Emily Lee Luan."
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yeah, I wanted to thank Jennifer, Jesse, Sophia, and the entire community at the Hudson Valley Writers Center for having me here. I'm really excited to read. And I also feel really lucky to read with Katie and Isabella, both poets who I really admire. I have a chapbook coming out in the fall, so this is the first official reading acknowledging that. So I'm glad for a chapbook celebration. And it's kind of in the process of, you know, proofs and copy editing and all of that stuff. And so I've been thinking a lot about my work in the chapbook in conversation with what I'm writing right now. So in that spirit, I'm reading some stuff from the chapbook, some stuff that's much newer. You might have to get the chapbook to figure out which is the chapbook and which is new. But yeah, that should be coming out in the fall. And I'm really lucky to have Gabrielle Calvocoressi select that. So thank you to her as well. The first poem I'm reading is part of a longer series of cityscapes that I've been writing, kind of in conversation with Chinese landscape poetry. This first one is called Tainan, which is a city in the south of Taiwan. Tainan. Raw beef, moved to grief. Padded girl on a bike, eyes, whole city. Under bleary-eyed moon, drawn mountain. Who to buy a cigar in the city? Face washed white, afternoon tea. Sweat singular, pearl in the streets city. Night dogs restless, sweet rice. Whose lonely slaughter, open mouth city. When my sorrow was born, after Khalil Gibran. When my sorrow was born, I held it like a dark pearl spit from its shell. And I remembered the salt that had rounded it before, centuries ago, before I even had a mouth. And my sorrow was unafraid, and it gave me bravery and my anger back, walked me to the tossing water and proclaimed the water mine. My sorrow held me and did not tell me not to cry. And the girls about me watched our sweet days together with longing, for they too wanted to be held by something with fingers as slender and delicate as my sorrows, fingers that tapped their temples and had them see how they had been wronged. And those who longed for my sorrow would never have a sorrow like mine. I knew that, for my sorrow had a forest black mane like mine. And my sorrow let me say, I, mine. And my sorrow sat with me on the bridge all that breathing winter, and my sorrow would not let me into the water. And my sorrow deveined shrimp and patterned them on my plate, brought me a wide bowl brimming with broth. And we ate fried eggs with chopsticks. We waited for my joy to come. Reversible poem in Dishwater. He carried me into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He reached for a cup in the sink filled with dishwater. Wait, I said, and opened the cabinet for a glass. Still, he went for the cup in the sink. Why do you want to drink from a dirty glass? I asked. It doesn't need to be clean, he said, but accepted the clean one I held out to him. I held out a clean glass to him. He accepted. He said, clean is a need, isn't it? I asked to drink from a dirty glass. I want you. The sink, the cup still, a glass cabinet open. I waited, filled with dishwater. The cup sinking, he reached for me, The kitchen carried me into the glass. A lesser known but very fun fact about me that I'm telling you all right now is that I used to be a cheerleader in high school. I was a flyer. And this is the only poem so far that I have written about that. It's called Hitting the Ground. Hitting the ground. I can't remember if he pulled my hair and on which night. I'm like that these days. He might know what parts of me to touch, when to turn me over, or not. All I ever remember is that it's blue, and then it's morning, the long train ride home. I never imagined that this would be what I was promised in high school locker rooms. The unparticular dark, the seeping, the sinking knees. In those days, I knew it was shameful for a boy to call me pretty, because then he'd like girls like me, with different parents. I felt ashamed too, for the ones who didn't understand that desiring me was dangerous. If I saw them staring at the bloomers under my uniform as I snapped in and out of the sky, in and out of the arms of girls more lovable than me. The only rule of cheerleading was to never let me hit the ground. But that wasn't the kind of untouchable I wanted to be. I wanted to be pressed against, jarred, an object thrown without fear of glass breaking. At practice, Michelle did splits on the blue spring floor as she told me about her first time. It hurts, she said. And I wanted it because she had it. Anyway, could it hurt more than I already did, shaking my maroon and silver pom-poms as if the shimmer could transform me into an earthly animal. Every time they put me up, I wanted to come down, painted across the field in the flood of stadium lights, the vacant blue of desire spreading as wide as a country. I put tasks I do for free into a folder titled Jobs. There are not enough hours in the day before I have to perform affection. That's an objectively robotic thing to say, my therapist tells me, when I speak about my responses to sentimentality. My weekly battle with the laser printer, a kind of intimacy, my pleading. I don't want your flashing red light, I say, telling me you won't go. I wear shoes I found on a sidewalk. That must mean something, my feet bathed in the ghost of someone else's feet. When Cynthia, the taller and much older cousin, looked under the deck and saw that the baby birds in the nest had their heads bitten off, I screamed until someone inevitably told me to stop. I've always been this sensitive, hands clapped over my ears. A pure emotion, like thread trickling from a spider, is rare and terrifying in its precision. After the particularly stressful movie, I provoked a fight. Or should I say the fight lived in me, and then it was rattled out of me by the screen performance of other griefs. All emotion feels to me a kind of performance. I'm trying to unlearn that now. At the cafe, my laptop screen kisses the screen of the laptop across from mine. Moi, though the other screen already has its partner. the acupuncturist smoothing tiger balm on my shoulders every week. That could be enough to live for. Who will love me when my Wi-Fi code runs out? I break my grandmother's $100 bill on squash and eggs. She touched that bill. I saved it as a greedy child. That money goes quickly from me now, as she went from me, as now she's gone. I thought that money is little to me now, and the thought rattled out a nest of bitten off sadness. I was in Chinatown when the building with the archives burned, but I didn't see the smoke. That's where those beautiful archives are, I said to my companion and pointed freely. Sunflowers. The gray night, walking home, we found sunflowers leaning against the fence, as heavy as heads. In the morning, you held my head in your palm, and we stared at each other down the long length of your arm. We swayed together, if only for a little while. Then you kissed my toe and left. I pulled the comforters out after. You had swept the bed. The room bloomed with your sweetness. I thought, you can know somebody for a long while and not know their scent. I thought, love, is it for me? Could anybody ruin me? A week later, the sunflowers were gone. Overhead, just sky. In the driveway next to the empty stalks was a family that lived in the blue house behind the garden. A little boy played with a fire truck. His mother and father smiled at me as they held the deep-petaled heads, fondly combing their soft faces. On the ground, so many seeds. It felt like the final revelation for a long while. We laughed together then, the mother, father, and I, and the sunflowers laughed too, because they knew the loss was not a loss after all. And the sunflower seeds too joined in, opening their pinched mouths, and all together we were a high chorus, and they sang to me as I continued down the road, the many feet of their voices carrying my small heartbreak. I think I will read just two more. This next one is a ghazal, loosely speaking. Ghazal, loneliness. I find a portrait of a man on the F train a lover drew inside the back cover of a book. Draped in his blue shirts, I note all the sentences he underlined about loneliness. Green is the color of the spring I didn't want to be of this country, this world, a chartreuse bent to the narrow light of my loneliness. In Kyoto, my mother and I loved the same mosses, the same dyed linens. We wandered the city together, steeped in direct and distinct lonelinesses. To travel with only the shore ahead in sight, Wang Wei looked back. To long for what trails behind, a vast surface of loneliness. In winter, I walked to the store, the trash bags on the street, frozen, flopping like crows. It has been a life so far of buying fabrics, flowers, to be threaded from loneliness. A pillar of salt, a closed door. What is it that is wanted of a life alone? The city dense after a midnight rain, wine drunk, and an indulgence for loneliness. 师者智，知所知也，在心为志，发言为诗。In the heart, the purpose is clear, a nonsense of an unintelligible loneliness. I find myself in the mirror, recognition before speech, hair inexplicable to the waist, the jeweled curtain that shields the ancient moon from loneliness. In this final poem, there is one Chinese character at the very end of the poem, which is the character Hui. It means to return. And this is going to be my last poem. Thank you, everybody. Obad in milk white. My father used to be a manager at a beverage factory. At the end of the day, when everyone else had left, he'd fill one of the vats with leftover milk and steam it until it was hot. Then he'd leave his clothes on the factory floor and take a long milk bath. Every so often, I remember this story, and I won't know if I've dreamt it. My father in the milk fog and silver machinery. Those were the days my father ran up debts of beer and cigarettes at the local store, and before my long-haired mother began working at the factory. I imagine his body disappearing into white, his full head of black hair, the first exclamation of a calligrapher's brush on rice paper. Did he long for a woman who could become my mother? Did small sounds in the silence frighten him? I want to inherit loneliness from the scene, but what do I know of my father's dreams? I'm still creating my own mythology of moving water, the field mice tunneling through ice in deep winter. When I draw a bath, I'm usually trying to take myself from sadness and into sleep. And in the blackest hour of morning, my head calls back my body, like the bird that circles high above, singing, Hui, Hui, Hui. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was really beautiful. Do you know when exactly your chapbook is being released?
I, to be honest, probably know as much as you do. But
Okay. Well, everybody
sometime in the fall.
keep your eye out for it from the Poetry Society of America. And if you're a member at a certain level, you'll probably get one in the mail, but we'll keep you posted on our social media too. And so will Emily. You can follow her. She's on social media. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Katie Farris is an award-winning fiction writer, poet, and translator. Most recently, the editors of the Beloit Poetry Journal selected her book, A Net to Catch My Body in Its Weaving, for this year's title in the Chad Walsh Chapbook series. Katie Farris's work has appeared in Virginia Quarterly Review, Prairie Schooner, Verse, The Nation, McSweeney's, Granta, the Massachusetts Review, which awarded her the Anne Haley Poetry Prize. She is the author of the hybrid form text, Boys, Girls, and translator, as well as co-editor of several books, including Gossip and Metaphysics, Russian Modernist Poems and Prose from Tupelo in 2014. Her translations of New Cathay, Contemporary Chinese Poetry, 1990 to 2012 from Tupelo Press, received Poetry East-West's International Translation Award, which is awarded in China annually for, quote, a translator of exceptional skills. Her translations and original work have appeared in anthologies published by Penguin and Grey Wolf. She is an associate professor of creative writing at Georgia Institute of Technology. It is rare that a chapbook of poetry asks and answers its own urgent question from the first poem in the collection. But this bold chapbook does just that. She asks, why write love poetry in a burning world? To train myself in the midst of a burning world to offer poems of love to a burning world. Please help me welcome Katie Farris.
Much, Jennifer. Oh my gosh, what an incredible reading tonight. Emily, Bella, those poems were just so gorgeous. I'm so excited and my imagination is on fire. And if I wasn't about to read, I'd be running off to try to write something. You guys are really inspiring. So thank you. Thank you so much to the Hudson Valley Writers Center. It's been, gosh, it's been a long time since I've been up to visit y'all, but I have actually been able to go up and be where the magic happens. And it's just so cool to see this in another form. So thank you all so much for being here. I see some really beloved people in the audience and I want to say hi to each one of you, but I should probably do my job. So yeah, I'm going to be reading from A Net to Catch My Body and Its Weaving. This book of poems, I started writing it this past year. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was 6 days before my 37th birthday. And so I started writing as I was kind of going through it. So that serves as a little bit of a warning as well. These are some pretty, some of them are some pretty honest poems about aspects of breast cancer. So I'm going to start off with the poem that Jennifer so kindly quoted from, called Why Write Love Poetry in a Burning World? To train myself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell. The body, bald, cancerous, but still beautiful enough to imagine the body washing, whoops. Oh no, I'm gonna start from the top and then it's gonna go smoothly. I'm gonna start again. Why write love poetry in a burning world? To train myself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell. The body, bald, cancerous, but still beautiful enough to imagine living, the body washing, the front porch step, oh no, you guys, what is happening? Ooh. The body, bald, cancerous, but still beautiful enough to imagine living, the body washing the front porch step, the body chewing what it takes to keep a body going. The scene has a tune, a language I can read. The scene has a door I cannot close. I stand within its wedge. I stand within its shield. Why write love poetry in a burning world? To train myself in the midst of a burning world to offer poems of love to a burning world. Oh boy, that stanza just got impossible there for a second. All right, this poem is called Tell It Slant. You float in the MRI gloam, several spiculated masses. I name you cactus, carcinoma bedamned. You make a desert of all of me. Have I said it slant enough? Here's a shot between the eyes. 6 days before my 37th birthday, a stranger called and said, "You have cancer, unfortunately," and then hung up the phone. That is, unfortunately, exactly what they said. All right. This is called On the Morning of the Port Surgery. So when you have cancer, when you're undergoing chemotherapy, they put a little, there's a procedure that they have where they put a little machine into your body and it pumps the chemotherapy directly into your heart. Chemo is so, or at least some forms of chemo is so toxic, they can't really put it into an IV because it destroys your veins. So this is On the Morning of the Port Surgery. Before dawn, I walk outside the clock. I strip and fold my clothes into a bag, surrender my braid. I'm wheeled into the operating theater for the opening act of what will become a defining role as cancer patient, stage 3. Oh, feather-headed mongrel, my pickled, flea-bit heart, thrice sword stabbed, please keep beating. Ungraceful, the heart boinks, suspended, spider-webbed, and drugged. This is called In the Event of My Death. What used to be a rope descending my vertebrae to the basement of my spine grows thin. In solidarity with my first chemotherapy, our cat leaves her whiskers on the hardwood floor. I gather them, each pure white parenthesis, and plant them in the throat of the earth. In quarantine, I learned to trim your barbarian hair. Now it stands always on end, a salute to my superior Barbary skills. In the event of my death, promise you will find my heavy braid and bury it. I will need a rope to let me down into the earth. I've hidden others strategically around the globe, a net to catch my body in its weaving. So this book is a book of cancer poems, but it's also a book of love poems. So here are a few of those. The man you are, the boy you are. The man you are opens the door to your anguish, a mirror of my own. We've both grown silver around the eyes, but the boy you are brings me a melted candy bar in your pocket. You issue commands like an old man, then take out my trash like a young boy with a crush. Right. This one is called Outside Atlanta Cancer Care. I return to this point of wonder. What kind of animal began to stand on such small feet and only 2? What vertical absurdity, what upright madness. Perhaps we were imitating the trees, lifting our arms, wishing for roots, and then forgot to set ourselves down on our 4 more rational feet. Our longing grew our fingers longer, twigs to our branches. For if you long hard enough, do you not find fruit in your palms? I return to this point of wonder. Okay, it's getting a little saucy, so, cover your ears if you don't want to hear it. This is called An Unexpected Turn of Events Midway Through Chemotherapy. I'd like some sex, please. I'm not too picky. After all, have you seen me? So skinny you could shiv me with me? Philisexical, soft and gentle, a real straight fucking, rhymed or metrical. Whatever you've got, I'll take it. Just so long as we're naked. All right, continuing on in this or a similar sort of vein, this one is called If Marriage. If marriage is a series of increasing intimacies, a slow, sweet collapse into oneness, I would still beg your forgiveness for asking your assistance unwinding that pale hair from my hemorrhoid. I'm going to read just a part of this next one. It's sort of a series of 7-line poems that all have the same beginning. So I'm going to read two of them. This is called Emeloma, a riddle and an answer. And actually, so I was reading Emily Dickinson like from February of 2020 through late July, early August of 2020. So I was reading the complete works, boy, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That was a long haul. But I took that book of complete poems of Emily Dickinson with me to my mammogram, and then to my biopsy, and then to my first appointment with the oncologist, where I found out that I had cancer after that terrible phone call. So she came with me through a lot of it. So I started writing a book. I was calling it Emeloma, which was like Emily, the name Emily Dickinson, and then Oma, which is indicates a mass or a tumor. It made no sense, but in my brain, it made perfect sense. So anyway, this is a couple poems from that. Emeloma, a riddle and an answer. Will you be my death, breast? I had asked you in jest, and in response, you hardened. Of my resolve, malignant, magnificent, palimpsest. Will you be my death, chemo? The shell of myself in the sphere of time, plucking the wool of my hair from its branches. So the poems in the book are more or less chronologically organized. I went from chemo, then I had my surgery, then I went on to radiation. Actually, the book came out literally pretty much almost exactly the same day I was finished with my radiation, which is the end of active treatment, which is a laughable statement. I'll be in treatment for a long time, but so anyway, but I digress. This is called A Week Before Surgery, I Practice My Body. Like Giotto's angels, sketched from his studies of sheep, I open the jaws of my back to the sky, eating my body deeper into this blue. Like Jonah, vomited from the whale, fragrant as ambergris, or plain as any woman who, a week before mastectomy, practices being opened. All right. I'm going to read this one. Okay. Is there anything you need to know? No, this is called Woman with Amputated Breast Returns for Her Injection. Now, I lack the muscle to pull me into the third dimension, but in these two, I can give you the world. 3 drains, 5 scans, $20,000. Come, doctor, how do you like me now? I never wanted to be anything but biddable. You see the outline of my shape? Fill it with your pencils, 7 points tickling me with color. I can. Watch me can, watch me do, watch me has, watch me watch. This cancer patient has ambition. I scratch, and here we are dancing the chart. When you give me that Lupron shot, it's from one long needle and right in the gut. Actually, that should be Zoladex. Lupron goes in your butt. Okay, so I'm going to read 2 new poems, actually inspired, well, by both of you. You were reading new poems, so now I feel like I need to read some new poems. This is dedicated to my radiation techs who were so fantastic. I think one might be in the audience now, but there might be a different Jody here. So I'm gonna read this anyway for them, whether they're here or not. This is called Radiation Prayer. It's not in the chapbook, actually. Given the unexpected choice between uncertain death and certain damage, I find in the mirror a woman, breastless, burned, who in an advisory capacity asks, "How much do you want to live?" Enough. O God of radiation, let your light like a ship pass through me, your radiance exposing what's inside me like film a god takes. But must you clatter the eaves of my scapula, scurry the grasshopper nest of my heart, scythe my nerves like grass, and cobweb my muscles to the rungs of my ribs? How much more can one body take? enough. Light every deadly cell like a wick burning in the paper lantern of my chest. My chest, a thing so ephemeral, yet held so firmly in your fist. Okay, this poem is called Heart Failure. I just recently discovered that the chemotherapy that I took, that thankfully it looks like it pretty much took care of the cancer. I got a pretty good PET scan a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic. But in about something like 5% of cases, chemotherapy causes heart failure. So I was just diagnosed with heart failure. This is really new. Boy, I've been trying really hard to write this poem. I can't even tell you guys. I've been breaking my brain on it. So it's probably not finished yet, but it's good to try. Heart failure. It's humbling, the doctor says, her voice befuddled as she traces the mouths of my valves. My own heart mumbles. She ponders in her second language, and I shush the nurses. Do you mean murmur? I lay back in the chair, sucking on the sky for air. Please, air. Is breathing the only prayer? Mayor of the light air, oxygen, pays my lungs fare and gets nowhere. Outside, rain paints the sidewalks white. And if chemotherapy marked me, then by God, praise the blight. And my last poem is called When You Walk Over the Earth. When you walk over the earth, it asserts itself. Here, 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 it says to your feet. You must reckon with the earth, though it enters you less. The sky always has its hand in you, as if you were a puppet, through your ears, down your throat, into your lungs, and with the tips of its fingers there, it caresses every capillary, each blood cell, until they blush. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing reading. Thank you so much. It's so great to have the three of you here. And thank you all for reading new poems. We love when you do that. It's great. Okay, so Sophia and I are going to pin the readers to the screen. And we're going to have you up together for the Q&A. Don't forget that you can type your questions for the poets in the chat. We'll start with a question that we always ask all of our readers, because so many of our audience members each week are students at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and many of them are putting together their first collection, and it's often a chapbook. So you will all be particularly good at answering this question. What is your most salient advice to people putting together a chapbook, especially for the first time?
Okay, I'll do it. I love chapbooks. I have 3. I think I would rather publish a chapbook than a book sometimes. I love the compression of the form. I think there's something really essential about it. You know, some projects need to be books, right? They have big ideas and they need to, but I think a lot of times chapbooks kind of written off, like they're the thing that comes before the real thing. You know what I mean? And that's sometimes what they are, and that's totally fine too. But I think there's just an extraordinary opportunity in a chapbook to give a kind of a focus that's harder to get in a longer collection. So for better or worse, I'm a big fan of the project kind of book. I like having a topic or an idea or even a form sometimes that I'm playing with. I have a lot of unpublished chapbooks, like whole books of, sonnets or something like that. Like I'm not going to write a book length, collection of sonnets, but it gives me sort of an opportunity to play with an idea in a way that feels like more extended than just like a couple of things. My recommendation in terms of thinking about how to organize a chapbook, I'm really big on, I print everything out on 1/4 sized. Like you can do this in Word, although I always have to reteach myself and it always takes me like an hour every time to remind myself how to do it. But you can print it out so you get 4 pages on each sheet of paper. And then I cut them up. And usually I use highlighters because I'm a nerd like that. So like body poems will all get like a red strip, and like sex poems will all get like a blue strip. You know what I mean? And that way I can sort of see, and a lot of poems have multiple colors on them. That way I can sort of see as I'm going through how an idea might gather and release over the course of a text. Sometimes you want to really braid them together so you've got sort of even amounts of everything throughout. Sometimes I think it's nice to have things sort of build to a crescendo. So there are 2 points where sex poems kind of come into the forefront in this chapbook, and then they kind of drop back for the Cancer poems a little bit too. It's tough to ever make a generalization on what you want a book to do, because every book has something different to say. But I really love, for me, seeing the text visually that way. I can't read that small anymore, but I know what the poems are more or less just by the shape of them. And seeing them visually for me has always been the thing that unlocks me from my habit of starting at the beginning and reading all the way through. And that's wonderful, but you miss patterns that way. And that's the best way I found to teach myself to like see those patterns. Okay, that was long. I'm stopping now.
That was great. Katie, I just pulled up my poems because you can see like all my tabs from doing the same thing of being like, this is this kind of poem, this is this kind of poem, and like scaffolding them that way. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think I either think of the chapbook as like a project, like I have a specific like form or a specific cycle of poems I want that, might not span the course of a manuscript. At least for this current chapbook, my first year of my MFA, I took a class with Brenda Shaughnessy where we put together skeletons of our work. So essentially, like if your full-length book, you might not have finished it yet, right? But there's usually like a rib cage or like a spine to it. And what are the poems that what are the ribs of that skeleton, right? So taking out the poems of what you hope to write or what you are writing that formulate a narrative or an argument, and having that be the chapbook is kind of how I formulated mine, or like what I don't have the full manuscript yet, or I didn't have it at the time. So what could I put into the world that's like representative of the argument I'm trying to make in my writing? So I found that it was like an exercise for me, actually. Like I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Can I put together a book? And the chapbook felt very empowering to me in that sense. Yes, Brenda did take that from Lucy Brockford. I'm glad it's continuing to be passed down. Thanks for that, Jennifer.
I think you both nailed it, so.
Thank you. That's really good advice. Sophia, do you have a question of your own or one from the chat for us?
I do have a question of my own. Much of the poetry that we've heard this evening focuses on traumatic events, from sexual assault to painful childhood memories to cancer diagnosis and treatment. Often we hear writers discuss how the time between an event and writing about that event was integral to the process. And Katie, the opposite is true of your poems tonight. You actually began writing about your cancer in the thick of it. How do you think that influenced your poetry? And Emily and Isabella, please also share your experiences and thoughts with time and or closeness between the events or themes of your poetry and the actual writing process.
I think the fact that Katie is writing through this is so tremendous and brave and miraculous. It's hard to say because I think trauma affects everybody differently, and the way that we process it or can admit it to ourselves and to other people also occurs in phases, and it's not on a prescriptive timeline, as all of you know. So it is hard to say. I will say for me, I had to go through an experience where before my MFA, all my poems were very tight and metered and constrained. And when I got to the MFA, Tim Donnelly, who was my thesis advisor, really, well, it was Lucy, and then Lucy was ill, and then it was Tim. And both of them sort of encourage like a feral perspective on things. And so what I found was, as I tried to write into that space, this thing kept coming out of me that I realized the form of the poems had been trying so hard to contain. And one day I just was like, you know what, just say the thing, just say it. And I went to write it and I couldn't do it. And it was a process of like having to admit things to myself, admit things on the page, that then sort of opened up a whole new world of poem making for me. So it's been really interesting to trace that trajectory. And I don't know, Emily or Katie, if you have this experience, but I feel like form, or like the construction of a poem, also teaches me something about myself. Like, what am I really? And in the newer poem I read, I have a line about like, how can I say this in a way that like I can't cover up an artifice now? Because I think it's such a, I love when poems call themselves out. And I think so often like writers are trying to bury, you know, their truths, and it's like, we're all here to learn and engage and connect with one another. And nobody has time for disguise or artifice. So at least in the poems I care about. So I think it's just a constant for me, moving towards that authenticity and towards that place of vulnerability. And Katie, I think you do that so brilliantly. So I'm also gonna stop talking now.
Thank you so much, Bella. Yeah, I appreciate particularly what you're saying about the timeline. And I would not have expected to have approached writing about cancer like sometimes it was literally I got back from a treatment and I was like, I'm going to write the poem about this thing today. And I think it's strange for me because my previous work was very fantastical. It was very not grounded in reality. It was not grounded in my experiences. You know, I wasn't interested in that so much. So this was in some ways, a real about face for me. I was not, like you say, that sort of plain spokenness that for me, the direct address to the reader a lot of the time, or to the lover in these poems as well. I mean, it's a very new sort of approach. One of the things that I had been doing was writing little daily poems, oftentimes very embarrassing poems about my husband, like humorous poems that I was like it started off private, and then I started publishing some of those. And so I was in a sort of a great place in some ways, that I was practicing this dailiness of writing, where I wasn't thinking too much about what the end result was going to be, just trying to get a scene down, you know, almost every day. So it was one of those weird places where I really understood like how important it can be to establish the practice, so that when something happens, I could catch the ball, if that made sense. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't ever a daily writer in my life until the last couple of years. and just the fact that I had established that, I think if I hadn't had that basis, I never would have been able to write these poems as they were happening. I think the fact that I was a poet of the body too, always have been, that's the one continuity that has been there all throughout. Whether I was writing fiction, poetry, hybrid form works, any of that kind of stuff, it's always been based in the body. So in some ways I was like, sweet, I'm sick. I got something new to write about the body, you know? The sex stuff was getting old. It was time for something new. And I think that, but that being said, you know, I got to the end of cancer, like I said, radiation, when this heart failure thing, that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago that I was diagnosed with it. And I've been just struggling. I mean, partly I'm just very tired. It's been a hell of a year. And I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I don't know if I have anything left to say. You know, I'm hoping I do. But that idea of the timeline, you know, sometimes I was right there with it. And now I find myself in this kind of molasses period where I'm just sort of wandering around being like, what the hell, you know, like some of it's starting to catch up. Certainly a thing that happens. So I think if, you know, if there's any kind of advisory part of this, the fact that I was able to do it for a period of time, I consider a minor miracle. And I'm going back to slow and steady wins the race at this point.
Thanks for that, Katie. I really love this question, Sophia. So thanks for asking it. I don't really have an answer. I think I like push and pull between like free writing every day and being like, I'm being avoidant, so therefore I have to do the opposite thing, which is write about whatever it is that is on my mind, you know, serious or not. But also I really feel the thing of like not trying to push something that isn't, like, I really do trust like the idea that a memory that's not put down will resurface later. So I try to follow that also as much as I can, but then I don't trust myself and I'm like, I gotta write it down for later. But yeah, I also just really love, Bella, what you're saying about naming the thing, saying the thing. And I think a way that I've approached like this idea of like artifice is just by using the word sorrow or sadness or loneliness, like naming the emotion again and again in my work as a way to kind of force myself. I'm sometimes a little bit avoidant, so like forcing myself to confront that emotion on the page. And I found that to be a useful tool, if you will.
That was a great question, Sophia, and thank you all for your really thoughtful answers on it. I have a question about process. I recently heard Carolyn Forche talking about her reading practice and how she reads a book of contemporary poetry a week, but every season she takes a deep dive into a writer. And when Katie was talking about reading Emily Dickinson for months, from before her diagnosis through her treatment, I was wondering about your writing practice, your process, writing and reading, if there's anything that you'd like to share for our students about that.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I think you said something, Jennifer, about writing in seasons or something like that. I find that a lot of the writing process for me is seasonal. And I don't know if this is just because I grew up in Florida. So the summer, I always feel very rooted in my body and I want to be in the world and with people. And I'm like a scavenger soaking things up. And then in the winter and in the fall, I'm not used to that. This is like new to me the past 5 years. Is that special time where in the Northeast, everything is dark and cold and quiet. And there's a sort of like permissiveness about being a writer during that time that I think is really sacred. And I remember, oh my God, reading through the complete works of Louise Glick in October of, I don't know, 6 years ago. Lucy brought her up at Columbia, and it just like I couldn't get enough of it. It was like, it just felt, I was like, this is it. So I there are certain works that I return to during different seasons of the year. And Katie, much like you said, I very much am a poet of the body. So I think that like I'm influenced by the light and by the way I'm moving through space and the people I'm with. And then the poems are a reflection of that. So yeah, I guess that's all I'll say.
I have a kind of like particular relationship to reading at this very moment, which I guess I'll share, which is that I've been really trying to mend my relationship to reading. I feel like I don't know if this will make people feel better or worse, but I just like haven't been able to read at all for like almost the past 2 years. I mean, like I have read books, but I just have been struggling with sitting down and getting through whatever it is that I'm reading, whether it's like a nonfiction book or a poetry book, or, you know, I read a lot of translation as well. But so yeah, this is something that I think I'm really swayed by, this idea of reading a book a week, people who read like 20 books a month. And I was really letting that get to me. Like, I feel like I'd kind of felt okay about how much I write, and I've gotten to a good place there, but the reading thing has been difficult for me. But more recently, I think something that has helped me a lot, I've been reading more recently, is allowing myself a little bit of balance. So the deep dive into a certain kind of writing was actually not serving me and was making me feel, I was just like reading texts that were requiring so much of my brain space constantly. And it's always good to kind of balance out like a dense critical theory text with a really pleasurable book of poems or a novel. And that was, yeah, a lesson I learned. It took 2 years for me to learn, you know, as well as being inside and not commuting and not being able to like read on the train where I usually do a lot of my reading. You know, kind of acknowledging and forgiving myself for those things has been important for me. So that's maybe something I'll offer in case other people are feeling the same way about this past year.
Thank you so. Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I think that I mean, I've got kind of, at this point, I've got a little bit of a practice that I try to do like 4 or 5 mornings a week, which is I literally set a timer for half an hour and I read a book of poems. And then I set a timer for half an hour and I write a draft of a new poem. They're 99% shit. I mean, they're terrible most of the time. Sometimes I start a series like the Will You Be My Death X from the reading that I did. I've been writing those 7-line poems. I usually write 3 or 4 of them a day. Like I said, most of them are terrible. And then often I'll just pop the heads off of them. And I usually have a little metaphor left over and kind of like try to use those as material in other places. So I've got at this point a couple of like basically crutches to keep me moving forward, as I've been sort of less inspired. Like sometimes I sit down and I read and write all day, but it's a real rare day. You know, I find that if I use that timer, I at least get that much. You know what I mean? And oftentimes, yeah, I skip weeks at a time, months at a time sometimes, but that's the process that's worked best for me. I really love that deep dive thing. And I've done a couple of them in the past couple of years, but then like I'll get to a writer I love Robert Frost, but when I sit down and try to read his complete works, I want to die. It's just not working for me yet. You know, I sometimes I really just have to dip in and out of things. And sometimes I really can, you know, I had a real success reading Vasco Popa's collected works, was awesome. And then I turned around and tried to read Tomás Chalamun, all of Tomás Chalamun, and I was like, this guy is insane and he's making me insane, you know? So like, it's just funny how I would love to be able to be consistent and disciplined in every part, but you know, sometimes that's just not the way it is. When I'm struggling a lot with reading, I'll often pick up an anthology because it's, you know, if one poem's vibe is not hitting me where it needs to hit, then I'm hoping the next poem, you know, when I turn the page will do that. But yeah, it's more or less how I try to do it.
Thank you so much. Do we have another question from the chat that we want to ask? I think we have time for just, well, maybe we don't. Do people have to go? It's supposed to stop at 8:30. If anyone has any other thoughts that you want to share, that was all really helpful about your reading practice, your practice of writing. This was an incredible reading tonight. And again, thank you for reading new work. We really loved hearing all of your new poems. And Emily, we will keep our eye out for your chapbook when it comes out, hopefully in the fall. And if you don't have Bella's book and Katie's book, get it. Someone in the audience wrote to me, Katie, and said that your chapbook has been sold out at Beloit. So do you know if they're doing a reprint?
I am not sure. I let them know about a week ago that it had happened. So I'm not sure, but I'll probably repost something on Twitter, something like that. If you follow me when they get new ones in, I'll just try to put a little note up in case anybody wants to check it out. But hopefully they'll get it.
I hope so. I hope so, because I know we have people who would like to buy it. So thank you all so much for this. I hope that we'll see you all next week for our reading. Please check out our upcoming events. Our fall season, part of it is up. September and October is up. Major Jackson will be launching the fall reading series. So please come back. Please sign up for our newsletter. Sophia will send all of you information about how to rewatch this and a survey tomorrow. So please take it if you can. Thank you so much, Katie, Emily, and Bella. We really loved hearing your work.